Welcome to the Marketing Optimist podcast. I'm not sure where we are in the series of this, but we seem to have done quite a lot since lockdown kicked off. Today we're going to be speaking to Daniel OCock, who is a branding expert. Now, I met Daniel when I gave a course kind of a year and a half ago where we talked about making raving fans. And actually on that course, I talked about Henderson's Relish, which if anyone's met me knows it's one of my things that I desperately love, being from Sheffield. And actually on that course we mentioned this kind of bit of artwork, which is kind of fan art from Henderson's Relish. So I guess that all ties into Henderson's brand, even though it's kind of unofficial and Henderson's have nothing to do with that. So maybe we can talk about that later. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Daniel. So Daniel can introduce himself, tell us a little bit about what he does, and then we can start to talk about Daniel's thoughts on branding. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's great to be on the show, the video, the audio, whatever it turns out and where it ends up. Yeah, it's really good to be here. So what I want to do is introduce myself. So I'm a brand identity specialist. So I work with entrepreneurs, business owners to help them establish or even develop a brand identity. So perhaps reposition it in their marketplace. And really what I'm going to talk about today, as well as answering any questions, I think we've got some people coming up that might want to ask some stuff, is how strong is your brand? So the questions that come about when people start to talk about brand, exactly what it is, and for me, the kind of fundamental strategy that sits behind the brand. So yeah, I'm hopefully going to shed some light on exactly what people should be thinking about when they're talking about their brand. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. So
shall I kick into some slides, because I've done a little presentation for everybody.
Oh wow. Okay, yeah, that's cool.
If I share my screen, let's go for that desktop there. So you should see a big massive sand dune at the minute, but if I press play,
yeah.
Can everybody see that? So how strong is your brand? We should have a nice big screen that everybody can tune into.
You've got a bit of my branding in there as well. Marvelous.
Yeah, I thought, we're on your show. We need to be saying it's you, right?
Yeah. Thank
you. Absolutely. But it was a question that you'd put out there when you were promoting the webinar, and I thought, well, look, we need to go off that question. We just need to put a bit of substance behind that. First up, brand is not a logo, and it's not fonts and colors either. I get this a lot, and people will come to me or I'll be chatting with them and say, yeah, I've just done my brand. It's got a new logo done off Fiverr. And that's not, it's just part of what your brand, in terms of a visual identity, it's definitely there, but it's not brand. And so people don't get that. Okay. But brand, I guess the logo, in fact, let's talk logo. So the logo, it forms a part of your branding, but it's definitely a misconception. What is the logo? I kind of wanted to touch a little bit around that and discuss it, but they are important, and I want people to think of their logo as something that is instantly recognizable, something that would be associated with your brand, not your brand. And we know that these logos, these brand identities are powerful. Who remembers this game? The logo board game. Remember it?
Yeah, I've still got it upstairs, and I have to win every time. I can't lose.
But it's a great idea. I didn't actually know there was a proper board game. I remember it as an app that you could, what they did was they took key parts away from the logos, and then you still had to work out who that company was. And what better way is there than proving that a logo or an identity is important? Okay. So, but people love that challenge of working out. So the logo, it is important. Got some colors in of yours as well. Hope you like them.
Yep.
So what happens if we look, if we're talking logo, but what about if we're looking at a new logo and, you come to that point where you think, I need to redesign it. But for me, when I get asked that question that I need to redesign my logo, there has to be a reason behind that. And this is where the brand strategy comes in. And I've given this as an example quite fitting that Rolls-Royce have just rebranded, and I've noticed I've left a capital letter out of Rolls, but then we can let that slide. But it's if you redesign your logo without any strategy, it's you might as well do something like that. And if I pull up my next slide, I've done a nice little bit of Photoshop work for you here. But what we've got here is a Land Rover. It looks like a Land Rover, but what's the badge on the front there? I don't know if you can make it out on your screen.
Yeah, it's got the Rolls Royce. I can't remember what it's called actually, but yeah, the Rolls Royce.
The Flying Lady. Okay.
Flying Lady, that's it.
Yes, but that for Rolls-Royce is their logo, their symbol of what you visually associate with their brand. But what does that what does that logo stand for, that badge? So with Rolls-Royce, you've got, things like luxury, decadence, wealth, all of those things that when someone says, I've got a Rolls-Royce, start to conjure up in your mind. What's a Land Rover? Rural, functional, rugged. I don't know any other words that to do with farming, but there you go. That's what a Land Rover is. They're two completely contrasting brands, but this is why brand strategy matters and branding more than just your logo. It's important to have that. They just don't, if there's no thinking behind it, then you kind of end up with this weird hybrid. Or in a business world, you might get your uncle's nephew to design you a logo for 20 quid and put it on your website. But that's the principle that I wanted to kind of get across there. So why does branding matter is a question that I do get asked, but really it's more about telling that person or trying to make sure that client knows how they can think like a brand is probably the best way that I can put it. Being able to change your mindset. How do you do it? Well, I usually start with 3 simple questions, just 3. And the first one, who are you? The second one, what do you do? And the third one, why does it matter? So I hope you can answer the first one. If you don't, then maybe we need to have a chat straight away. What do you do? Becomes a little bit easier to answer that. But it's the third one where most people trip up. Why does it matter? But it's this third one that is really quite integral to finding out and uncovering what your brand is, what you stand for. So I wanted to give a little example of a company that I feel know why it matters. And do you know John Deere as a brand?
Yeah, famous for the tractors. There's a very famous episode of Mad Men where they get I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, you really should see it. They win the account for John Deere and then get tractors in the office, and there's dire consequences. It's hilarious and horrifying at the same time.
Believe it or not, I've started watching the series of Mad Men, but haven't watched it all. It's quite an old series, but it does look. It's one of them that it's on my list. It's coming. Don't worry.
Yeah, you get back to me when you see the John Deere episode. It's hilarious.
I will do. But John Deere, I think they're a brilliant example. If we look at why they think what they do matters, is we're John Deere. We make farm tractors and related equipment. There's an extra part to that, though. It matters because generations of farmers have trusted our equipment, and that's what John Deere stand for. That is their brand. Now, if we take that to the next step and look at their trademark, they have the silhouette of the leaping stag, and their tagline, added by me, by the way, this is not part of the logo, but nothing runs like a deer. So that's their strapline, that's their motto. And John Deere have kept things incredibly simple, and that for me is why they've got so much kind of power and presence behind them as a brand. And essentially, if they can keep it that simple, their brand should keep running. It should always exist and stand for what that brand matters about. If we took this a step forward for John Deere and do what quite a lot of businesses do, and start to think, well, what else could I offer? What could I do? Maybe, I don't know, we do tractors, healthcare, fertilizers, rural property. All of a sudden, their brand doesn't differentiate them. So we're John Deere, you know us for tractors, but we do much more. Why does it matter? Because you can come to us for lots of things. I don't know. Well, at that point, the consumer's thinking, actually, I think I'll just buy this cheaper tractor, okay? Because you guys do other stuff, but you know, you're obviously not that good at tractors, so I'll go buy this cheaper one. So they've muddied the water, is where I'm going with things. If they stray from what they're doing and they're not keeping their, staying true to why it matters to them, it affects how they position themselves in their marketplace. So keep it simple. That's what I want to kind of pop in there. Don't overcomplicate things. People do. So brand strategy, what I kind of wanted to just pop in was a little summary of what brand strategy is to me at the minute. So it is at the heart of most business success. That brand should shape the desired perception of a product or service. It's going to reinforce your competitive advantage. The big one is that it will create differentiation over other products. The brand, your brand, we want it to create trust. We want it to resonate with your target audience, as well as inspire people to take action. So it's a pretty powerful statement. And when I'm working with a client on their brand strategy, I'd always start with the fundamentals of strategy to discover what makes you different. And an example of things that would come out of basic brand strategy would be things like, if you've not looked at your ideal client profile, do you have a positioning statement? Do you have a core message? Have you explored beliefs and values, personality, tone of voice, style? These are things that really should be considered, if they've not already, to work out what your brand is and what it stands for and why it matters. And they sit alongside that brand. So there's some elements that start to go into the creative side of things. So I've got a little slide, which I found a quote, actually, was from David Aiken. I quite liked it because assimilating a brand to managing a timber reserve, or a timber reserve is quite good rather than a forest, but that idea that you're planting these new trees, these customers that you want to grow with your brand, for when you want future profit, but basically being able to harvest all the trees, you're constantly looking after them. So you're nurturing these new trees, you're letting them grow, they become good trees, they probably worth more when they're a bigger tree, etc. I just thought it was a really nice analogy to put in there that I do share in some of the presentations that I do. So that's a really key, really nice little point. A lot of the time when you work with a designer that is working on a project with you, there's really, I think, 4 possible goals with design in general. And the first one would be to identify something. The second one would be to inform. Third one to entertain, and the fourth one to persuade. So they're like a pretty general overview, but they're 4 possible goals that, if you're looking at design, the outcomes of working on a design with somebody. But with branding, there's a 5th goal, and that 5th goal is to differentiate. And it is important. And the reason why is, especially with brand, it's that essence of how you are seen, how you're seen, how you heard. You talked about whether it's whatever platform media it is, the brand will influence that. It's also, if you're different, it's how potential customers perceive you, position you in their minds. The brand and how you're different will give you confidence. It'll give you conviction behind that business. And I've seen it happen with a number of clients where we've worked on brand and basic brand strategy, and then gone on to do some design and identity work, and it starts to filter down from the top. So I'll give you an example. There was a business called Load Hog in Sheffield, and I rebranded them. I think it'd be about 24 months back now, 24 months ago. And they've got a big workforce and they're an employee-owned business. And the moment that we started to change their brand and their identity, when it started to reflect in some of the colors even that were painted throughout the building, the logo and the signage that was up around the building, people started to get a buzz, and they were like, what's this new logo, and why are we changing this? And there was a real sort of conversation internally that was opened up, and there was just it was fantastic to listen to and to hear them experience this. But it then gave higher sort of middle management up to senior management more confidence, because there's suddenly this big boost in how everybody feels. So, you know, it really is important, and it just stems back to brand. And then ultimately with brand, and this probably pins down to the visual side of things, is being able to create an emotional connection with your audience. And that's the one that's going to get them to come back. You know, it's the reason you go back to Starbucks, perhaps, instead of choosing the local coffee shop. I don't know, maybe there's an emotional connection to why you go to Starbucks. The fact that the coffee that they buy is, you know, harvested from somewhere that you like the taste of. I don't know. Or perhaps it's where you meet your friends. There's an emotional connection there anyway. So yeah, differentiating and working through these parts is definitely, it's where brand strategy comes in. And I don't start creative until a client has been through a workshop and uncovered some of these factors. And I've got a little quote here from Martin Neumeyer, and I read quite a few of his books, but I love this quote. A brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. The customer is the ultimate, right? And if they're not coming back, then why not? Is probably the first question you want to ask yourself. So that kind of brings the slides to an end, but what I wanted to just round off with was a couple of things that people can do next. If anything that I've taught through, they're thinking, oh yeah, actually, what he was saying about the strategy, there's some things that people can do next if they want to take any action with myself. So I have two ways really that people can uncover their brand. I do a Brandscape Scorecard test, which is a series of specially designed questions that allow me to uncover a bespoke scorecard for your business. There's kind of 6 pillars that we'll look at and analyze, and then we'll talk through the results one-on-one. It's completely free, and then it's up to you what you do with those recommendations. It's that way that, you know, I can get people to open up their eyes and say, actually, yeah, you've got a point. That bit probably could do with some input. So the scorecard, the Brandscape Scorecard test, one way that we can look at analyzing how strong your brand is. So I've got a link there. I'm going to give you a link, Richard, and you can pop it in show notes, post it in YouTube and stuff, but people can just book that. Like I said, there's no cost for doing that. And following on from that, so the other thing that people can do is the Brandscape. I develop what I call, and I've trademarked it, the Brandscape. And we work through a series of workshops, and all of the elements that we work through strategically form part of your brand landscape, hence the term Brandscape. So the other thing that I'm doing is one-to-one Brandscape strategy workshops. So they're £350, and the stage 1 is the fundamentals. So we'd be looking at things like why it matters, uncovering that why reason behind your brand, your authentic points, your positioning statement, your core message, your vision, and your mission. And I've actually got 3 podcasters who are building Brandscapes for their show at the minute. So it can be applied to anything. It doesn't have to be a business. It's quite exciting with the podcast side of things, because I do a podcast myself. But podcasters have started to come to me and say, I'm a bit confused with my brand. What do I do with this? I said, well, let's do some strategy work. Let's uncover it. Let's find out where you want to go with things and why it matters. I've also doing Brandscape strategy work with a US SaaS business. They're a new client that's just come on board. So they're going to be going through an entire process. They've got the workshops to do first, and then we're going to lead into actually delivering an identity for them and a visual brand identity as well. So that's all well and good. If you just want to have a look at some free advice, if you want to have a look and see, listen to or read through some things that I've produced around brand, I've got 6 brand focus points as a PDF download that gives you some insights into things that you could do now to help add value to the business through branding. I've also got a podcast episode that's dedicated to that, and I'm going to give you a link to go and visit that if you would rather listen rather than download a PDF. And I'm definitely going to end this time, but I'm leaving you with my own motto, which I kind of tie into the end of my show, which is, if you're not proud of your brand, how do you expect anyone else to be? Okay. And that's it, Richard. That's kind of where I'm up to.
Lovely. Well, thanks for that, Daniel. That's been really, really good. Just thinking, can you... that's it. There we go. Lovely. That's what I needed you to do. That's fab. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we're back. That was really great. And thanks for featuring my brand on the on the slides. I won't be as impertinent as to say what do you think to my brand, because it might not be good. I hope it's good. I'm kind of building it up.
We'll do a scorecard.
I think I'll have a crack at it, actually, because it's really interesting. One of the things that happens with a lot of businesses that I find is they don't think about their brand values, how they're going to position themselves. They just kind of start. So they just start the business. They give it a name, and initially give very little thought to a name to begin with. And then kind of go, well, I've got to put something on it so people recognize you. So that's why they kind of go down the Fiverr route of sticking a logo or just finding something. Because I think a lot of startups initially, they just kind of know they need something. They're really quick to kind of get off the mark, and it just doesn't. It's just not something that flows from them. So I'll be interested to find out, how do you get a client to come on that journey to realize that they need to build a brand, especially when they're kind of going, well, I've just opened a shop and that's all I've got. And you know what I mean? When they've got that mindset of, they're just kind of in a doing mindset, how do you take them along the journey to kind of help them discover a brand? What do you do?
Well, if I'm honest, Richard, the clients that don't, if they're a startup, they're not often at a point where they'll realize the value of brand. So perhaps they're not necessarily the right client for me. There are that method that you just talked about, where they go, I'm going to do a business. It's called Dan's Burgers. I just want a picture of a burger and I'm going to put it on my Facebook page. I don't think there's actually anything wrong with that from a stage one, because it's all you need. And often you don't have the funds, or it's an overwhelming idea to think, I need to have a brand. I mean, some people say I need a brand, but what they really mean is I just need a logo to put on my page so I can get it noticed. And I think where I come in with the brand strategy is when I find that my clients will reach a plateau. So they've got that burger logo and they're kind of earning what is a good amount of money, but they think, hang on a minute, why can't I get this? Why can't I get it any bigger? How come I'm only earning what I earn? And it's at that point when they think to expand, where brand can really play a big part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It is one of those things where I know, obviously, we've only been going for 4 years, and brand values do develop over time. I think I've always come up with my own personal values, and I think that's obviously what's reflected a lot in the Marketing Optimist. But obviously, we're a very Yorkshire business, very kind of can-do attitude. But those things, it's always really difficult to articulate a lot of those things. I know they're in my head, and we get a feeling. And I know Chris, who works for me, who's on the call, he hopefully he's got a good feeling of what our brand values are. Kind of that honesty, integrity, straightforward, no messing about. But it is always difficult to articulate those, and I think they do kind of develop over time. So I think you've got a good point, is that it's difficult to leap straight into brand, because a lot of people just can't articulate it. They just can't get it in their head. They can, oh, we just sell phones, or we just sell whatever we sell. What do you mean? What's our brand personality? I don't get it, because it's just not in their head, and it's difficult to without somebody having a brand, difficult to start articulating that from a when it comes to our side from a marketing point of view. We do need those brand values to kind of help them portray themselves, because you want to make that connection with your ideal audience. And if your ideal audience, if your brand values jar with what you perceive as your ideal audience, it just bounces back, and it can go so wrong if the two don't meld really well together.
I think I often find that businesses who don't realize that they've got a brand problem are businesses that have started to look around in their marketplace as to what other people are doing who they aspire to reach the level of. That's when for me, that's when you're saying to yourself, well, why am I not turning over what they're turning over? And then you end up in that trap where you mirror what they're doing.
Yeah.
They did it like this, so I'm going to do it like this. Well, that's the complete wrong thing to do, because you're not creating your brand. You're just going to mirror what they do, and you'll do it cheaper. And as we all know, price is a race to the bottom.
Yeah. I mean, we had that experience earlier this year. We had a client who started a business from scratch, saw an opportunity in the market. There was already a kind of incumbent in that market, and they just kind of started and went, you know what, I just want all my ads and everything to look exactly like theirs do, because theirs are working. It's like, right, okay, so, but then they ended up being a lot of confusion between the two, and they just wanted just to get going, but they'd not thought about their photography, how it was going to be different, what their pitch was. They just wanted to get going, and unfortunately, it kind of didn't work. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but fortunately, it did work, because their competitor brand actually bought them out. So they,
right, okay.
So I guess it did work in that way. They did quite well out of that, I suppose. But because they'd not thought about it, just kind of launched at it, and then came to us and went, how can we get this penetration? It's just like, well, they're already going, and you can't just follow what they're doing, because it just doesn't match that what they're doing will always work. It's really tricky.
So, yeah, exactly. And I think if their ultimate goal of the business was to be bought out, if they'd taken some time to do some basic strategy, then I would have suggested that the basic brand strategy would add value to that business when it came to an exit point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you'll have built up a solid base that would come with that, a solid base of customers. So that's kind of where I would go with that one.
Yeah. An interesting thing that always comes up with brand is kind of the cost. You see these massive brand redevelopments. So a classic one I can think of is the BBC. So they've not done it for a while, but for a long while, BBC's logo was actually BBC in squares, and they were italic. And then there was a big story. They spent millions of pounds basically making them not italic. And obviously there's a huge outcry. It always happens with things like that, and Olympic logos. So there was clearly the massive issue around the Olympic logo, which people just hated. I actually quite liked it in the end, but people,
that 2012 one.
Yeah, the London Olympics. I didn't mind it in the end. I don't say I loved it, but I didn't mind it. I think again, how do you think that companies can represent those brand developments in a better way than just those kind of horror stories that people grasp onto and go, £100,000 for turning it from italic to straight?
I think what you have to look at and what you have to take into account with anything that's a cost is the actual value that will bring to a business. So for example, the Olympics, where will that identity be positioned? Who will see that identity? What will the identity be put on that will be you know, conceived as merchandise. That would be a perfect example, I guess. All of the touch points that bring value to that business, to that organization. You know, if it's taken £1 million worth of brand strategy, design and development time, I don't know the figures, but to develop that brand and that identity, but you end up with £20 million worth of turnover of merchandise alone, then it's not a bad investment, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was making a note about kind of what your favourite brands are at the moment, but then I had the thought, and we started this call before we started recording, talking kind of about Lego. Now, Lego is a worldwide, is now the biggest toy product in the world, as far as I'm aware. But I think for a long time, in the kind of not so far ago, they were really struggling. I think there was talk of Lego actually going bust, God forbid. And so I think there was a huge amount of kind of rebranding inside Lego. But what they didn't do is, as far as I'm aware, and maybe you can correct me, Daniel, as far as I'm aware, they didn't amend or change the logo. But what they did do was kind of change the brand essence. So they simplified all the positioning down. They went on on a big play push. That was kind of what they were. I think they got back. I think they'd gone off kilter and really got back to kind of their core values. And
yeah, I mean, it
accelerated them. So
I'm not sure about it in you know, minute detail, but it does sound to me, from what you described, that they just took a step back from their brand strategy and their visions, like you just said, their beliefs. And it's a very old brand. I can't even remember how long it's been going.
I think it's like 100 years. It's
100 odd years, isn't it? Yeah.
Wooden toys, wasn't it?
And so that's a classic case of, you know, even if you've established your set of your positioning statement and your set of values, your vision, you need to revisit it. You know, times change, people change, customers change, buying habits, etc. So yeah, that sounds to me like what they did. And look at the result. They didn't. I mean, the logo has evolved over time. We could put up examples online, but it's only ever so slightly. And even like that example you were just giving with the BBC, even just slight adjustments to a visual identity allow an audience to think something's changed here.
Yeah.
But not too much. But then other things might start to change as they implement different strategies. And all of a sudden it's like, have you seen what Lego are doing with the thing? Or have you seen the new look to the BBC iPlayer? And all of that stuff, just the kind of the visual tweak that's slight, preps people for change that's coming.
It's an interesting point on how it kind of demonstrates on how brand is not necessarily, like you said at the beginning, not necessarily a logo, a font, a color, because it's kind of the personality. It's like it's a person. It's like, well, what the logo, the color, the typeface, or whatever is kind of what the person wears, but the brand is the whole person that comes all together. So how they feel, how they act in the public, what their reaction is to global issues. I always say that brand and the marketing is it kind of starts it together, is how you answer the phone, how your emails are, what your social media presence is, your website.
I've got a word that I would use, Richard, because you're doing that example of a person, but it's the reputation of that person.
Yeah.
If you knew that someone was if you knew I was coming into a room, I'd expect my reputation to be Dan's coming into a room, probably going to be talking about branding. Or, you know, if Richard Branson's going to walk into a room, he's got a reputation that kind of precedes him. So he's probably going to be talking about business or something like that. So for me, it's that reputation that precedes you, but that you leave behind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like, I think you mentioned on your slides, it's what people say when you're not in the room. That's kind
Yeah.
of that's what brand is. It's because you can sit there and you say everything you want while you're there. It's what people tell other people when you're not around. That's really what your brand is, and that's why. Again, I had a conversation with a client a while ago who were convinced that they were all great, and it was about social media in that case, that everything was fine, whatever else. But then I went to man before we started working with them. I presented them with kind of all stats and information about the fact that people were talking about their brand when they weren't part of the conversation, because that was the really interesting bit. They were quite astonished that people were talking about their brand in a certain way because they'd never looked at it before, because it's the fact that how people were talking about them when they weren't in the room. And I think, to me, that's kind of the essence of brand, really, because that's the bit that once you've done all your work, in an ideal world, if branding's worked, they talk about you in the right way when you're not in the room.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And if you're letting, well, you'll reach a point, but I mean, I guess if you're letting people make up their minds without being influenced, then it's kind of like free for all, isn't it? Like, at least you can try and steer them a little bit, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so Chris and Gemma, do you have any questions for Daniel?
Not necessarily a question, but the when you said brand is what they say it is, rather than, and I thought there's been a kind of a theme throughout, post presentation during that discussion. Then there's a theme of kind of, it's this thing that's kind of hard to articulate and whatnot. And my journey with brand began when somebody told me, a record label actually, oh, you've got a brand, and I came out and said, what's a brand? Because apparently I'd built one, but I didn't know how, right? So it's like, it absolutely is. It's somebody's impression of you, not even a customer. For me, it's like, I know a few marketplaces really well, but I only buy the products of, say, one company within that. But actually, I could tell you the name of 6 of the manufacturers purely because their brand stuck in my brain. And it's like, it's the essence. That's why Apple is such a giant. You see that little thing and it's just like, there you go. It's perfect. Its brand can be really beautiful. It's just how it's done. And in a business sense, in a few roles pre-working for Richard, I sort of, brand was sort of thrust into my title a little bit because I'm a copywriter. So it's like voice of brand. There you go. You have brand. And they kind of just like throw it at you and sort of sigh with relief. And actually it's like, well, I think those are the kinds of staff members that are going to really actually get brand. The people who can be a little more kind of articulate about things, maybe.
Yeah, perfect example, because a copywriter is somebody that you would want on, or quite heavily involved in the strategy workshops, because the strategy workshops will help form things like your tone of voice, and we'd work on things like mottos or taglines. But all those mottos and taglines only come about from, talking about your authentic points and why you're doing what you're doing. All of that content will help a copywriter to go, right, so if I use this word, that's going to conjure up this. So yeah, I think a copywriter to be involved in brand is if you've got that tool, get it used.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a big part of a lot of the work that I do. I think there's always like, through the copy, it's not only has it got to be optimized, but it's got to be on brand. Otherwise it's pointless. It's just a collection of words. You know what I mean? It's certainly in this world that we're in.
Because I bet how many, I'm not well versed on the copywriting industry, but I imagine that most copywriting jobs are like, can you do us this advert? And you're like, well, what is the advert? So you start to think about a title for the advert, the product, what you're selling, whatever goes into it. But what you could really do with is finding out the tone of voice. So how am I speaking to this audience? What do you want them to feel? Those kind of questions. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and as well, I mean, that would be fair, but it would also be kind of, I would be a lot broader and say that a lot of my job in some places has been providing a voice, providing some identity, you know, and it can be, you know, we don't really know, we know what we do, but we have no idea who we are. Can you write me my website copy? It's like, okay, yeah, we can, that's my job. But like, if I'm not in my job and I just think about that kind of on a different, I'm like, that's mad that's a job, but it is, and it's all brand really to me while I'm doing things like that.
Exactly.
I'm not saying it covers every basis, by the way, but I'm just saying it brand is certainly in mind while I'm going through that.
And it's the same job, the same challenge as a designer. So as a designer who creates visual identities for brands, if you don't have any strategy, I could produce anything, well, given anything, but there's no reward producing something that people go, well, actually, that's not right, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things when so when we've done kind of logos or copy or websites or whatever you kind of produce back, one of the worst points is when you kind of go, okay, so you've told us what you want, we've asked pertinent questions, kind of what's your tone of voice, how are you, who are you, all these things. And they present something back and they go, no, it's not right. And you go, but we based that on, I mean, me and Chris have been through this a couple of times with clients, and we go, but we based it on what you told us, and go, no, we don't talk like that, and that's not us. And then you go, but you told us that's what you did, and we kind of, and it's frustrating, but I guess it's part of the creative process. It always has been, of going, well, I've got ideas, I think I've interpreted what you want, here it is, and then they can quite easily come back and go, yeah, no, that wasn't in my head.
Yeah, well, I'd be asking them if they've got, you know, that as a company, do they have those documents? Have they got the set of guidelines, the brand guidelines, which would include your tone of voice? And if they haven't, then, well, you're putting that together for them on the basis of this one advert, which is no good.
Yeah, no, it happens, but we obviously we're good at kind of weeding that lessons out of our clients, so that works really well. But it can be frustrating and difficult. It can.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm kind of talk about it in an ideal world, like when I say, oh yeah, well, you haven't got your tone of voice, but some clients would just be like, what do you mean, my tone of voice?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but do you have anything to ask?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
No problem at all.
Interesting.
Good. Okay.
Funny little thing to add though, just out of interest. I know logo isn't brand, far from it. However, what's the simplest logo that's ever made the biggest impression on you? I'd be curious.
Simplest logo.
Yeah, and obviously I know it could, you know, a memory could affect that, a bit like music. So it's a strange question, but I just mean, like, you know, the simplest logo that has kind of that's been powerful and kind of stuck with you.
Well, I'm taking it quite literally from a design point of view. So
Me too. That's what I mean.
Yeah. I'm just, there's one that's sticking in my head, but I'm just now trying to think if it's, well, I'm good. That's two, right? It's simple. It's the Toblerone logo.
Oh, nice.
Because it took, I can't remember how many years back now, and it was pointed out to me a bit like that logo game. There's a hidden bear within the mountain.
Oh.
And this was years back now, but I was like, I never even noticed that. And I was like, that's so simple, but like it had an impact. I remember it. And then the other example I was going to say is FedEx. So that's another example of a really clever, simple piece of design identity work with a hidden arrow in there as well. So yeah, so they're two that I would say were simple, that have definitely had from a design point of view, that have had a lasting impression on me for sure.
Right,
Good question. Cool. I like that.
I think Amazon have got the appropriated the FedEx idea, haven't they? So the tick underneath kind of goes from A to Z, and it's also smart.
I'm going to pull up my browser while I have a look at it.
It tries quite hard for that. So Amazon does that. I think Chris, I'm going to chip in, and one that's probably quite an old one, and probably people don't really think of it probably much, is the I Love New York, the I Love NY logo.
Oh yeah.
was designed because New York had a terrible problem with like gang violence and stuff. So the guy who designed it died quite recently, and I can't remember his name. I can't recall his name. Maybe
I
Daniel.
feel like I should know it. I've got a friend who knows, like, you know, all the famous design studio names and stuff, and he's like, he would know exactly who it is.
Yeah.
And I feel a bit embarrassed that I don't. But yeah, you're right. Just
Yeah.
the heart. I mean,
yeah, just this the I Heart NY, and it's ubiquitous. And actually, I think
Yeah.
most people don't think it's even designed, but I think it might be. I'm going to say Milton Glaser, but I'm probably just making that word up. I'm not really sure. But yeah, that's a ridiculously simple one that just stuck.
I'm googling it as we speak. It is Milton Glaser. Yeah.
Oh right, that's tick point to me. I remember. I think he died recently, and I think that's why. But yeah, the I Love NY is it's iconic, simple, straightforward. Couldn't be. I mean, it must have took him like 5 seconds in theory. And this is the whole thing with design and everything like that. You go, oh, that must have took you 5 seconds. But no doubt it took him like a year and a half to come up with all that, and there were thousands of ideas that he threw away.
Yeah, but also a lifetime of experience that allowed him to be able to come up with a concept that quick. And that's something that
that's
a lot of businesses, especially with brand and identity specifically. So can you do me a logo? Is why things like Fiverr, it becomes a time relative thing. Well, it'll only take you an hour to do that. Well, it might take somebody an hour to do a logo on Fiverr, but what are you actually going to get for that hour, right?
And it could actually take 50 years, couldn't it, to get to the ultimate logo, the ultimate brand, the ultimate, sorry to interrupt you. That was rude of me, but that's
all right.
That was where I was, I was like, yeah, it could, the answer to the question, if I was going to answer that question, it was a special edition thing. So they'd had a product, and it was a special edition thing that would require them to change their logo a little bit. And it was just for this one product, it just looked magnificent, and it was, nobody used the product, but certainly go and look at the packaging. Camel cigarettes, but the black, Camel black. And it's a simple black cigarette packet, but absolutely jet black, and a tiny, tiny silver Camel. And like the guy, when he delivered them to my table, I was like, what is that? Like, these are amazing. Like, it just looked so cool.
Yeah.
And it's kind of always stuck with me, that just tiny little silver Camel on a black background. And
I guess just to kind of come back to the very beginning, that's the essence of brand, isn't it? That was a sleek black packet of cigarettes. We're not condoning smoking, by the way.
Yep.
With a tiny iconic little logo in the bottom of it, and the exact words you said was, "Wow, that's cool."
Yeah.
Exactly
Made you. It got an emotion out of you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that is the actual essence of brand, I would say. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, that was probably a poor example because of the industry.
Who cares about the example? We're not judging the.
It's actually a pretty good example, because they're not allowed to do. They don't have brands like they used to. They don't have it anymore. The spend was phenomenal from tobacco companies like back in the day. Well, Mad Men would be a good example, because they just need to walk around smoking for the entire episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
So actually, quite a good example, that one, really.
Marvelous.
Good.
I think on that note, that's a really good point, actually. So, if you can find an image of that, Chris, I'd love to see that package, and where we can include that in the video notes, because I've never seen that.
Yeah, I'll send it across.
Yeah, see if you can dig that out. Cool. Okay, so thank you very much, Daniel and Chris and Gemma, for coming on the call. We've got another webinar coming up in 2 weeks, and then another one after that. We tend to do them every 2 weeks. If you keep an eye on the marketingoptimist.co.uk website, we will be posting this video, and there are links so that you can book on future webinars. So thank you very much, Daniel. Thanks for your time, and hopefully we'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you very much for having me on, Rich. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.